Thank you for tuning in to the D6 Podcast. This is the family ministry podcast that helps you connect church and home. Over the next 3 weeks, we will be hosting a special series of podcasts centered on reopening the church. Whether you have already begun going back to your church buildings or are making plans to do so soon, we believe these leading voices in family ministry have plenty of good information to share with you. So tune in over the next few weeks to learn what steps they're taking.
I want to welcome everybody to the first episode of 3 in Reopening the Church, and we have assembled quite a panel for you today, and we look forward to our conversation on what this is going to look like coming out of COVID-19. This has been a major disruptor. We could talk about all the things that I'm hearing others talk about, but I've challenged our panelists this morning to go beyond the obvious. We're going to hit some of those practical areas, but we're going to look for the God moments that we need to keep as we come out of this crisis and see how we can turn this misery into ministry. And before we jump into our first question, let me introduce our panelists this morning. We have with us Sam Luce. He has served his church, which is Redeemer Church in upstate New York, in a variety of capacities over the past 23 years, which is quite a tenure, Sam. Appreciate you hanging in there. That long term, I know, has paid dividends. You've been a children's pastor, a campus pastor, and now you serve as pastor of families. He and his team are charged with the oversight of the discipleship of their kids from birth through college, and his passion lies in connecting kids, youth, and families to do a more robust understanding and application of the gospel in every aspect of life. I've had a chance to be with Sam at various conferences. He's been at our conference, and he is always answering at a deeper level than I see a lot of other people, and that's why I've invited Sam. So Sam, welcome this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Jay Strother is with us. He's the lead pastor of the church at Station Hill and oversees the South region of the campuses for Brentwood Baptist Church, and he's a graduate of New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary and currently pursuing his doctorate from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's a contributing author to Recalibrate, a New Measure for Family Ministry, Perspectives on Family Ministry, and several small group and video resources. Jay and his wife have 3 daughters, 1 son, and they serve as a host home for safe families. Jay enjoys good books, long hikes, strong coffee, and the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team. So welcome, Jay.
I didn't wear my Cardinals hat today like Sam wore his Yankees hat. I should have planned ahead.
I figured you feel left out right now.
There you go. I'm in mourning over the season so far,
Right?
For sure. And last but not least, we have Dr. Richard Ross. And he and his wife are an incredible couple, and they are the parents of Clayton. Dr. Ross has served as a youth minister for 30 years and now is a volunteer at Wedgwood Baptist in Fort Worth. And he's a professor to the next generation of youth ministers at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth. Since its inception, Dr. Richard Ross, he has served as the spokesperson for the International True Love Waits movement. He's written 23 books, speaks in over 35 conferences and churches each year. He's a dear friend, and he lives out everything he says. Welcome, Dr. Ross.
Honored to be here.
Well, it's good to have all of you here. We've talked off air, and I want to tell our audience what we're going to do so that they can expect this. This group is the first of 3 panels. Our next panel is going to be Eddie Moody, Lydia Randall, and Ed Stetzer. And our third panel will be Ken Brady, Brian Haynes, and Marianne Howard. And we're all going to tackle some of the same topics, even though the questions will not be the same. And the first 10 to 15 minutes of our episode, we're going to do rapid fire. We're going to deal with some low-hanging fruit and practical areas. As the church reopens and re-engages, I want us to give the pastors some of the things that they might not necessarily think about. And then the last 45 minutes, we have some deeper God moment questions for things that we should begin thinking about from a ministry perspective. And so I want to begin with the very first question. This is the rapid fire. You guys know what to do with it. And there's no particular order for how you answer. Let's just jump in here and make this a wonderful conversation. Here it goes. What are some of the practical routines for our churches that may no longer be routines in that church? And now is the time for leaders to begin thinking about it before those doors open for the first time. I'm thinking along the lines of, hey, there are some touch services that pastors might be overlooking. For example, coffee stations. That's going to be a different area. So let's just toss that out as a free-for-all. What do you think leaders of the churches should be thinking about in those areas?
Ron is a guy who preaches every Sunday. If people forget their coffee, I'm going to have to shorten my sermons. So that's just a practical reality that we're going to be dealing with. But no, it's a great question. I think all of us kind of had these hopes when this thing first started that at some point we, flatten the curve and they'd say, throw the doors open and let everybody come back in. And what's becoming more and more clear is that's not going to be reality. It's going to be a phased opening, much like it was a phased close down of things. And so we're trying to prep our teams to think differently. I know meet and greet times is still a part of the culture of many churches, for better or for worse. And so before this started, we were thinking about the fellowship fist bump, right? And the evangelical elbow. And now we're going to have to deal with distancing even in our gathering. So I think elements of the service like the Lord's Supper, even the ordinances, Lord's Supper, baptism, we're already talking about one baptism per Sunday instead of multiple because the need to clean the baptistry. Lord's Supper, those elements, being prepackaged instead of us passing those plates around. So I think there's elements in the service. And then some of the other guys might want to speak to some of the things that happened before and after the service as well.
Yeah.
For me, the whole meet and greet thing is the heart of the issue. I speak in a different church every Sunday. So even when the virus was beginning to spread, I see awkwardness among God's people because they love hugging each other and they love touching cheeks and they love but people are not going to know what to do. They're not going to know what's acceptable. They don't know what is going to cause an offense with a brother or a sister that might last for years. My very practical suggestion would be, I think that the leadership of the church ought to address that forthrightly, not as a big, huge rule, but maybe even through a skit or maybe a video that precedes the first Sunday to say, we need to love each other. We need to affirm each other. Our suggestion would be a way we could all do this, at least at the outset, at least until we know more about the illness. I think everybody would relax if they had very specific greeting about how do I walk up to this person and touch them or not touch them, and how are we? I think if the church could just settle on that, everybody would relax.
Yeah.
I think for us, I think the way we're sort of talking is how do we ease people back to a place where they feel comfortable? Because I think a lot of the issue is psychological in a sense of everyone's at home, hunkered down, listening to news and kind of afraid. So how do we get those who are most sensitive, to a place where they understand that we care about how they feel, but also there's other people that aren't in the danger categories and they're not super concerned and they need to be more sensitive to those who are. And so what we're doing is trying to create, this, remove the awkwardness as much as possible, yet still be the church. Because the thing is the thing that I think is so important in these conversations is to realize is that the church is like Dr. Ross is saying, the church is different. We're not Walmart. We're just passing each other and try not to breathe in the same space. We're the church of Christ. We're a family. We're the body of Christ. And Christianity is an inherently incarnational faith. It's a body faith. And so what we have to do is we have to bring people to the place where they, over time, I think, where we bring them along through good policies, through clear communication, and through thoughtfulness. We bring people to a place where we can worship together in a way that I think the Bible gives us, prescribes for us, that we can greet each other, like Dr. Ross is saying, with those hugs and holy kisses once again, and not create offense.
Very good. So I heard one of our politicians, our leaders this morning, briefing our area for phases that they may allow gatherings to come back together. And, we're hearing increments, and I know whatever increment we toss out here will be different in every state and region around. But there seems to be some universalities of this, of say 50 gatherings of 50, gatherings of 100, and then graduating them up if our gatherings do well over a period of time. Let's say there's a church of, 100 or 150, and we can only gather 50 at a time. Even though our church can hold 50, should we pack them in there every pew shoulder to shoulder, or what should pastors begin thinking about this? Every other pew, alternating, some angles in here. What are you guys thinking, even in small groups on this? I know you have bigger churches, but I want you to think about this for that average size church, and then let's scale it.
Well, we have multiple campuses, so we have like really small settings to larger locations. And for us, I think what we're looking at doing is counting the amount of people that come through, and then limiting, and then saying that we're full, and not being as worried about blocking off seats, more worried about how many people we allow in the building. And again, because part of the thing is we want to be careful with people. We want to make sure that we're being careful for those who are most nervous, but we also don't want to make it to be like when you come to church and seats are blocked off and people are roped off, that we want people to be together as much as possible. So I think for us, that's what we're going to be trying to do, is at every location saying how many, and then from there, depending on how many people we turn away, we'll probably add services temporarily.
Yeah. Now let me, but before Jay, I saw you going to jump in there, Jay, and this might be a question for you too. You're a sizable church, but again, let's think about this: a church of 100, 150, and with the every other pew and the social distancing, they can only fit a third of their people in. They've got to do 3 services. Do you have people sign up ahead of time, or you turn them away because they couldn't fit in by you're doing your head count? How are you guys going to handle that?
Yeah, I don't know that there's any easy answer to that. And I think a lot of it's going to be trial and error, to be quite honest. So I think if you have the capabilities to kind of do a reservation system, that's helpful. I know for us, we're considering, we have large enough facilities that we have some overflow venues. So you can help, the distancing there as well. But I think another thing to be mindful of is I don't think that everybody is going to rush back week one. I think there are some who are excited too, but especially among our most vulnerable populations, we actually want to shepherd them well and encourage them to stay at home. And so to that point, everything we're learning right now about communicating online, I think is going to have to stay in place. And so the good news is what we're learning isn't going to be wasted. Because that's going to be a part of the new normal. But I think, for us, probably only 50% of our people will come back week one, just because some are fearful. Others have very legitimate reasons why they don't want to be exposed, or their caregivers for senior adults. And so I think it's just going to be a matter of shepherding. Someone earlier talked about the importance of over communication. And I think that's going to be really important for us to say as shepherds, that you have to make a decision. We want to empower you to do what's best. And we're going to gather, but we're also going to provide resources online for you so we can continue to be the church. We tell our people that all the time. We don't go to church. We are the church. And so even if we have to be scattered, the Spirit can unite us as we worship together, whether it's from home or in the facility on a Sunday.
Awesome. So I have 2 follow-up questions before we leave this one, and feel free to keep jumping in, adding to it. But I'd like to hear what are, as I go out and go to the grocery store now, I'm really pretty pleased if I walk into a store and they tell me, hey, we've already sterilized these carts. They got one person assigned there just to do nothing but wipe down the handles, because they're out of the little wipes and everything else. By the way, I used to do the wipes and my kids laughed at me. Now I'm cool. I'm in the majority. Okay.
Ahead of your time.
I used to grab 2 or 3 wipes, wipe down the whole cart. I wiped down my cell phone. I wiped down my face, and then I threw it away. And my daughter would roll her eyes. Now she's doing it with me. Anyway, here's my one question: is what are the surfaces that we need to address that we're not going to think about, like door handles and beyond? So think about that one for a moment. Sam, I want to come back to you because you are in charge of Next Gen, that from birth all the way up to college. It's one thing to tell adults to social distance. I want you to tell us how you're going to instruct your leaders, teachers, and volunteers over kids when that's not natural for them. And even when most of the kids will do it, you still have a non-compliant child who's really out there. So think through that one. But let's talk about surfaces first here. What are some of the surfaces that we need to remind pastors to address that they might not think about? Offering plates were the easy ones. We're not going to pass those around and do something else. But what are the other surfaces that we need to address here?
I think touchscreens for kiosks, for giving, for check-in for kids. That's definitely something that we move, like empower all of our check-in people. We gave them those. We had 1 week before everything was shut down in New York. And it was helpful for us because we had 1 week before when it was sort of coming out and we still had church, but we lost almost all of our volunteers. It was half the capacity that was normally. So when you talk about are we going to have social distancing? I'm not sure that that's an immediate concern, because of what we saw. The thing I'm concerned about, and this is, being in charge of kids ministry, is we had to figure out what we're going to do with no volunteers. So that's the challenge. And so we've had to come up with a process of what we're going to do, how we're going to ramp back up to doing kids ministry again from when we open. But yeah, so I think all the surfaces that kids touch, because kids you're right. They're not going to, they say in New York, you're supposed to wear masks. 3-year-olds are supposed to wear masks. And that's just, those people have never had a 3-year-old. So it's not going to happen. It's just not, and so for us, the way that we figure, like with kids ministry, is that we're going to be committed to do our part as adults. And then we're just going to let kids be kids. Honestly, that's just what we're going to try to do, is we're going to make sure that there's not too many in a room. We'll close down rooms quicker. But in general, I'm not going to sit there with, in front of a 3-year-old class, 4-year-old class, and not let kids in who don't have masks.
Yeah.
And I'm just not. And so I think most families who bring their kids are going to be okay with that. Families who are concerned about that, I don't think they're going to come, honestly.
Yeah. So before I let you off the hook here, you teased us a little bit, Sam. You talked about preparing for not having volunteers. Give us 30 seconds or 60 seconds over what is your insight over that, and maybe it transfers out for teachers not showing up for any age class. Give us
across the board, kids and youth ministry. There was we lost everything, but I think we only had 2 volunteers that didn't call in. And so what we had to do is I had to make some phone calls for people that I knew that were physically okay. But we also had way less kids, so it worked out. So our plan for coming back is we're going to have families be in the worship service together for the first 2 to 4 weeks, and kind of, again, like Jay was saying, we're just going to play it by ear. But that's our first plan, is 2 to 4 weeks. See how many kids are coming. See how many volunteers potentially will be coming. And then from there, we've been doing our own kids TV show. And we're pivoting away from VBS to put our efforts towards that kids TV show through the rest of the year. So that way we can have something for people to stream at home that still feel uncomfortable. And then what we're going to do, the second phase for us in kids ministry, is we're going to have the kids stay in and sing songs together with their parents. Then we're going to dismiss them to a very spacious room that we have, and we're going to show our kids TV show. So we can do that with a very small amount of volunteers. And then from there, we're going to ramp. We're going to combine rooms based upon how many kids are coming and making sure that our rooms aren't too full. And we're going to be very committed to wiping down services more than we already have been, which we already do, and using our swine flu receptacles that we still have up all over the church. But yeah, that's sort of our plan.
That's awesome.
If I could just give an alternate point of view, which is probably worthless, but I've talked to 2 churches this past week that have said, in our planning, we're ramping up for an Easter Sunday morning crowd.
No.
They said, we think the fringe people are going to show up. The fringe people have been showing up in small groups on online classes and whatnot. And I know that doesn't translate, and I know that's just 2 people's opinion.
Yeah.
But they were sensing in conversations, people were saying, we really, really, really want to be together. We can hardly wait for the first Sunday. And that phrase of the first Sunday came up a lot. Obviously, the high-risk folk are not going to be there. But I think at least in the back of our minds, we ought to ask ourselves, what is the plan if these cars start coming to the parking lot and we don't have enough volunteers? What is the most gracious way we respond? I think that's at least worth considering. The people that gave that we didn't think were going to give, what if they just decide to show up on Sunday morning? I think we have to have a plan in place for how we're going to respond to them.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in here a little bit with one anecdotal item here. I've been talking to a lot of pastors, and I do think there's going to be that mix. There's cabin fever that's existing, but there's also there's an equal amount of hesitancy going, when we're allowed doesn't mean I have to. Right. In fact, we're taking that same approach with our own organization. Just because we're allowed to go back to work doesn't mean we're immediately going to let our team come back yet. They're too productive right now, staying in their homes, working. We're going to let them stay there a little while longer and be safe. But we live in a small town outside of Nashville purposefully. We've moved 45 minutes away from Nashville. And we are kind of famous for a town of 3,300 people of having the only drive-in theater anywhere around, has been around forever. Well, the last couple of weekends, the news covered it a couple of weeks ago as being sold out on Friday night and Saturday night, all the shows. And the people came out and they didn't care what movie was showing. They just wanted to be in community, but they could maintain their social distancing. That will be an interesting aspect. I think people will come out, but they're going to want social distancing. If they come out and there's too crowded, we might actually see people walk outside of our doors and leave. I mean, there may be some discomfort there. So I do think that these two areas are right. Any more on this topic before we move into some of our deeper questions that we have?
Well, one thing that we're also looking at is doing a service for elderly and those who have pre-existing conditions that we do with no kids ministry. We tell everybody to stay away, that please don't come unless you're of a certain age or of a certain physical condition. And that way it'll create an opportunity for them before, we'll do it the first service of the day. So that way they know that everything's been wiped down and clean. And it's a way for us to be able to help them if they decide, if they want to. Again, no pressure, but if you want to, that's an option in case you want to meet together.
It's a great idea, Sam.
Yeah.
Anyone else before we jump into our next set of questions? Okay, let me ask you a question. I love to get an answer from all of you, and then I'm going to start asking some of you specific questions here in a moment in your areas of expertise. The first one, and I think this is the one that I care the most about in all of this, is what are the God moments that any crisis teaches us, specifically now that we're learning in COVID-19, that I pray we never forget and will continue to implement moving forward. I mean, this has disrupted us, but I've heard so many good things, and I'm not going to elaborate on the ones I've heard. I want to hear from each one of you. What are the good things that we're seeing, observed, practiced, being done right now that we pray does not ever go away, that we don't forget?
Yeah, I'll jump in first on that one. I know Dr. Ross is one of my heroes in ministry, and we've talked about this for a long time, a movement of God in which parents would take seriously discipleship in their homes. Well, if we wanted to kickstart that movement, it just happened.
If ever there was a Deuteronomy 6 moment, this is it, isn't it, Jay?
Absolutely. And even to the point about families worshiping together. And even when they come back. So the opportunity for our next gen teams to pivot and put less emphasis on what's happening at the buildings and more emphasis on resourcing and being those Ephesians 4 equipper of the saints. I mean, that's the thing that we're really encouraged about. And we're encouraged that once we were able to put those tools in the parents' hands, they adapted really quickly. And so we're really prayerful and hopeful that that's going to continue. We've also seen a tremendous amount of gospel conversations. I'm a history nerd, so Rodney Stark's The Rise of Christianity, I went and grabbed that. He talks about how the early Christian movement in the first couple of centuries, there was a pandemic that hit the Roman Empire in 165. It lasted for 15 years. And during that time, Christianity grew exponentially. Why? Well, the Christian story, the gospel story, could explain suffering better than any of the pagan stories. Yeah. Christian communities not only cared for each other better, but were able to also care for those people in the community when everybody else was scared. And so there are so many things that in our church context, we've talked a lot the past couple of years about what we call future church, this movement from mega churches to multi-site churches to eventually the movement towards micro churches, so to speak. And the fact that, getting the church out there as salt and light into the different subcultures in our culture, that's happening now. And this time has been a catalyst for it. So we're seeing a pretty incredible movement of God during this time because of the adaptability of the gospel and the adaptability of the church.
Okay, Jay, before anybody else jumps in, I had people yelling at me from all over going, hey, will you repeat the title of that book?
Sure. The Rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark. He is now at Baylor University. He's a sociologist. And so he just does an excellent job of mapping that out. And it's one of the later chapters in the book that he focuses on that pandemic, but gives those two buckets. And I think the third one was just the opportunity bucket as well, that anytime there's a disruption in culture, Christianity has grown.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. Okay, Sam or Dr. Ross, God moments that you don't want to see go away.
I'll just capitalize on what Pastor Jay was saying. First 2 centuries of the faith are fascinating, but the first 1900 centuries of the Christian faith had mom and dad in first position. And I do think one of the things I hate to speak for God because he hasn't given me permission to do that, but it almost looks like he was just hitting this huge reset button saying, you knuckleheads cannot remember what my plan and pattern was, so I'm just going to orchestrate a situation here where you can't possibly miss it. But I think some of these grade schoolers and even teenagers that have been snuggled up against mom and dad on Sunday morning during their church's online service, I think that has flipped a switch for some. And the only question is, are we going to lose this moment and just revert back to the plans and patterns of the past, or are we going to capitalize on it? It would be an incredible historical shift if we really do pour gasoline on what I think is already happening in the homes and further that into the future. I believe with all of my heart in age group ministry. I've given my life to it. I think those that want to throw it out are not thinking holistically. But I think you choose age-focused ministry only when that is the most strategic, effective way to accomplish a ministry goal. Otherwise, you do it the way I think God intended to do it through families. And I just think it's just a major opportunity for us to capitalize on this moment.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I would say a couple things that came to my mind when you sent this over was one is the especially for teenagers, they have this idea that they feel like they're limitless. You know what I mean? They feel like there's nothing, they've never encountered death. The way that we in our culture approach death and treat death and suffering is that we push it away from us and estrange ourselves from it. And I think difficulty in Scripture reminds us that we are limited and God is limitless, not us. And we get that wrong. We think that we're limitless. We think God is limited. We say, God, why would you do this? How could you do this? And we tie his hands, and we don't realize that he's showing a change in a moment. And what doesn't ever change is who God is. And God is constrained not by our thoughts about him, but by his own goodness. And I think that is something that we have to make sure that we clearly communicate to our kids and to our. The other thing is I think that it's important, and I don't mean this at all. I'm a family pastor, so I talk about family worship until my head falls off, But I do also think that the role of the church is so important. In that, and one of the things that almost concerns me sometimes is the language that we use. Say we're parents are primary, we're secondary, which is true. I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is saying we're the cheerleaders and they're the whatever. And it's not. I think we're the offensive coach, they're the defensive coach. We're on the same team. We're trying to build faith from two different ends. And the thing I get concerned about, with this whole thing is how we define church. I think it's important for us to realize that that Christianity is not a set of ideas that we ascribe to. It's a person that came. It is God who came in the form of man, who came and dwelt amongst us. And I think that there is an aspect of we have to make sure that we realize that that streaming church is super important and super helpful in the season that we're at, and for people who cannot get to church for whatever reason. But the norm is us gathering together as the people of God, called out from the world to be a testimony, to be a witness, to be a voice, to be a voice of love and care, like the early church was, like Jay said during the Cyprian plague. It's so important for us to understand that we are, the Christianity is not ideas alone; it's incarnational. It is Jesus saying, "I am the way." It isn't here. There is a way. He's saying, "I am the way," and I think it's important for us to recognize that and make sure that we communicate that to our kids, parents, so they can communicate that to their kids.
Sam, I echo what you're saying 100%. I think everybody on here would too. We believe that the church is that launching pad. It creates the direction and the trajectory, provides the theological boundaries, and equips us so that in our concern, and I think we all share this, when our families walk away from church, they don't compartmentalize Christ and walk into the world. And so that's how we always try to define D6 and family ministry. And I think Jay and Dr. Ross will do the same. I want to toss the next question to Dr. Ross. You were kind of alluding to this, but you have been in youth ministry for so long, and you have watched trends over, I'm not going to say, it's a long time.
50 years.
There we go. You said it for me. So here's the deal, Dr. Ross. The current seniors for both high school and college, they've kind of missed out on some things. They've missed out on a commencement. They've missed out on gathering their parents together and celebrating graduation. They've not even been able to finish the end of their semester with their friends and kind of wrap things up. I don't even know if they sign yearbooks today or digital yearbooks, but whatever it is they're missing out on in their minds, maybe even in their parents' minds, they're facing somewhat of unknown prospect for, hey, is higher education, going off to college, even possible in this economic climate? Will I have a job, being there's 20 million Americans unemployed currently? Here's my question for you, how can ministry leaders, parents, and other adults in the church encourage, minister to those high school and college seniors who feel robbed of their finish and maybe even potentially their future?
Two quick thoughts have come to my mind. One is, I do think, regardless of when we assemble next, I think there ought to be some very physical way for the church to celebrate this milestone. And, if it's July, so be it. I think the church still comes around that graduating class and they do something to let those students know that we love them, that we celebrate this accomplishment in their lives. The other issue is more practical. I think a lot of times graduating seniors have depended on guidance counselors at school, maybe relatives, other people in the community, to give them a leg up on the future, help them figure out which way to go. What the church might want to do is to be more intentional about being an entity that fills in some gaps. For instance, there is networking that could take place more in the church if we allowed people to know how to do that. There are people that could give a young person a leg up on an internship, or, oh, there's a position in my company. I need to tell you how this would work. Or if you go off to college next year, you need to know after the first semester, you would be able to ... Our students could profit from expertise, people that know how to open doors, people that know how to network. And maybe we just need to say things publicly to make that okay. And specifically to say to a 50-year-old, hey, if you have an opportunity for one of our students to figure out the future or to open a door for them, this is your first action step. This is what you need to do to help that to happen. I guess you call that social capital, but there's a lot of social capital in the church that we're not taking advantage of. And for this graduating class, they could use it better than anyone could.
Yes. I'm reminded, I'm not trying to jump in and answer, but on this one, I feel like it might be a interesting insight. But my wife and I, when our kids were in high school, we gave them at different times future skills tests or careers tests. And rather than, as you said, and that's what prompted this memory, rather than letting a school counselor coach them and advise them, we said, okay, here's what we see your God-given strengths to do, and here's where you have aptitude. Here's the various careers, and we want to be praying with you as you explore this together. Imagine a church coming together and offering that and showing parents how that can happen and coaching them along the way. But good insight there. Other thoughts from you guys on this? I want to move to Sam and ask you this. Ministers, they kind of wear many hats, and even in your job description, you wear many hats. What one or two hats must the student or youth pastor put on during the first 10 to 12 weeks that teenagers return back to church? Because they do many things, but what would you advise youth pastors to begin focusing on those first to 10, 12 weeks they're returning back?
Yeah, I think definitely, the kids, there's kids are so different nowadays, for a lot of reasons. I think, for sure, like kids are more connected than ever. Kids know more about COVID than probably we do. And they know all these things. They research stuff. They talk to each other. They get good information. They get bad information. I think what I'm going to be having our youth pastors do is to have them think in terms of being a counselor and being an advocate. So being a counselor in the sense of there's kids who have been stuck in proximity where there's more physical violence has been up, abuse has been up as a result of the close proximity to people that they normally would have been able to maybe escape through sports and different activities. So definitely be talking with kids about what are some of the things that you're afraid of, and kids today, their anxiety is through the roof. And so how do we help them to point them back to the gospel, to say here's a real fear, but here is an illogical fear, and here's the answer to fear: is that you are not your own, but you belong to God. Like over and over, that this is our comfort. I love the way the first question, the Heidelberg Catechism, sets it up. It's, what is our only comfort in life and death? And see, that's what every kid is looking for. That's what every human heart is looking for. Is we're looking for comfort. And the answer to that is that I am not my own, but I belong. And this is what kids need to hear over and over again: is you're not your own. You don't make your own path. You belong to God. You have been set apart. God has rescued you by his grace for your good and for his glory. And so they're going to be counselors. I'm saying, make sure you're talking with, and in this, we're looking right now, we're calling kids and we're connecting with small group leaders, and we're trying to find out those things now so that we can be on the front end of those. But parents are going to be out of work. There's going to be difficulties that we don't even anticipate yet, but they have to be prepared for those. So the other thing is an advocate. I think that they need to be an advocate to say, hey, listen, I know that you like to, play Fortnite while you're while you're streaming service on another TV, but you need to get yourself in church, and you need to come back, and we need to come together, and we need to pray. We need to, because there's an aspect of one of the things that kids struggle with in my, is that you have to teach them how to communicate properly. Like, kids text things that they should never text. Kids don't call each other like they used to. Kids don't show up in person. They don't have they've lost the art of conversation. And so teaching them the importance of the church being the church and physically present with each other is a huge thing. And so I'm going to have our youth guys advocating to say, hey, let's get back together. Let's get back into groups. Let's explore options for video groups, but let's get back together and what are your fears, and point them to Christ over and over again.
That's awesome. Jay, let me ask you this question. Your church, like many, you have multiple generations in there, and I know every generation kind of deals with this differently, but how do you begin to teach people how to trust again? Because in this whole social distancing, we're starting to give people the dirty looks if they're a little too close in line to us, But how do you start teaching people how to trust again? And I think about this in a couple of different ways. Trusting people to come together in large groups, like in a church setting, because we need to get back together. We need that community. We need that accountability. Let's go a step further in this trust question for you, Jay. How do we deal with the parents, teaching them how to trust an employer if they recently got laid off? Mm-hmm. What about trust about being around people in friendly, more intimate settings, the small groups that again, we desperately need?
Yeah, as you know, trust is difficult to build, and it can be broken in a moment. And so I think as shepherds of people, we have to recognize that trust is tenuous during this time, and people are going to be slow to trust. And if we don't shepherd people well as we kind of re-enter through these phases, then I think that will cause some lasting damage and scars. And so I think there's several things that we can do. I appreciated what Sam said about kind of repositioning your ministerial staff, as counselors, as people who are advocates, because I think ultimately it comes down to relationship. Mm-hmm. And so I think the more seeds that we can sow during this time when we can't be together to build relational trust, the better. For instance, one of the super simple old school practices I've gone back to is I've got a yellow notepad. And when I hear of a need, or I see something on social media, or I immediately write it down, right? Just so I can reach out to that person, message them, text them, send, just something to know their pastor knows what they're going through. And I just hope that will help build that trust, so that when I have to communicate about some bigger things to come, that they know, oh yeah, he reached out to me. He knows what I'm going through. And so, it's just doing those little things, I think right now, will help build trust for those bigger steps that we're going to have to take the farther that we get into this thing. I think the other thing we've got to be careful to do is that we have to communicate not only the what, when we're reopening, how we're going to social distance, but also the why. We've got people in all of our congregations who run the gamut of they're really scared to, they want to overthrow the government and open every church right now. And so because you have that spectrum of people, I think you have to tell them the reason why. For instance, if we're in Tennessee, if Tennessee reopens, we may have to say, hey, because we want to be prepared. We're not going to open the church doors until this date. And here's the reason why. One of the biggest things I learned multiplying churches was don't assume. I learned that we had assumed everything, right? We assumed the gospel. We assumed people knew why we did church the way we did. We just too easily assume that people, because we're living with it 24/7, that people know the reason why behind our thinking. And I think that's not always the case. So just go the extra mile to over communicate and not assume, and tell people the heart, that you're shepherding pastoral heart behind the decision you're making, because there's just not going to be perfect decisions. But we want to build trust during the season, and we want that trust to continue when we have to make some tough calls in the days ahead.
Wow,
yeah,
that's good.
I just want to, Ron, I just want to mention what Jay said. I think that's so important. Like, I think to build the trust and to get ready to reopen, you have to start now.
Yeah.
Like what he's saying is that I think unfortunately, like in our church, in the church's like obsession with innovation, I think we've over relied on technology, and I think that's one thing that has really been my eyes have been open to. And what we're having to do now is, since we have to completely rely on technology, we have to think, how can we be personal? And so I think that is what we're doing is we're going back to some old school things, is like what Jay's saying. We're going back to some old school stuff. We're making phone calls. We're sending cards to kids, and we're doing things, we're checking in on kids. We're doing things that are more old school, because we realize this is that technology alone cannot connect. There has to be a person on the other side of the device. And that's where the trust comes in, like Jay's saying. That's so good.
Well, Sam, you're going to make me ask my third toss-up question for all of you rather than the second one. I'll come back to the second one because it comes right out of what you're advising us here. As churches quickly began to pivot at the beginning of this, and I'm a big believer, by the way, in crisis causes change rapidly. That history proves that out. And I think our pastors are going to be better on the other side of this because they've learned to adapt a little better. They haven't given up principles. They just have adapted their methods in this. Some of the motivation, though, in this pivoting or this adaptation of surviving was different than it was for others, meaning the motivation of surviving versus helping other people to survive. Yeah. How have our pastors navigated the difference in focusing on preaching compared to pastoring? I mentioned a while ago, multiple hats. How do you think they've navigated the difference between preaching and pastoring in this? And what does this look like as we come out of this? That's a question for all of you. Jump in where you want.
The student pastors that I'm connected to every week are planning a talk, giving a talk online Wednesday night or some other time. That is important to them. But by far and away, their greatest focus is on individual touches. Lots of them are breaking an entire student group down into smaller groups. They're connecting a half hour with this group and a half hour with this group. They are messaging individual students. In fact, they are busier, I would say, than they were even before the crisis. But the vast majority of that is what we would call pastoral. It really is focused on blessing individual kids, helping, walking beside kids, not because they've decided proclamation is not important. It's just because of the nature of the time and the crisis that personal ministry seems to be more strategic right now.
Yeah. No, and Ron, I would say, I think when you say pastoring versus preaching, this is a huge issue, I think, particularly for youth pastors. In my experience in leading youth pastors, what I find is their idea and how they view the ministry is from seeing someone preach and wanting to emulate that. And there's good aspects to that. But the problem is that with youth and experience, it can very easily, in a very social media rich environment that they've grown up in, translate the sheep that God's entrusted in their care as a fan on Facebook. And that as long as they're getting a like from their preaching, then everything else is okay. And what I tell our youth pastors, I beat into their heads over and over again: you are a pastor who preaches, not a preacher who pastors. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is that a pastor who preaches is someone who cares for the souls of their sheep through individual touches, like Dr. Ross was saying, but also through the care of their preaching. Their preaching is in a pastoral way, that they're not trying to impress with theological knowledge alone, that they're not trying to just be cool and win status on Instagram and become Insta famous. What they're trying to do is to care for the souls of the kids that God's entrusted in their care. a preacher who pastors doesn't do that. And so over and over again, listen, anybody can get up there and do whatever, but God has entrusted the care of the souls of these kids into your hands, and it is your job to shape that through the proclamation of the gospel. It's to shape that through modeling it in small group. It's to shape that through being transparent enough to take kids out in such a way that they see that who you are in real life is really who you are on the stage. And the thing I am honestly a little concerned with, again, Ron, is this idea that gets perpetrated by some of their heroes in youth ministry. Some of their heroes in youth ministry can give off this idea that it's all about conferences and stages, and those things aren't wrong. Like, I've been to all those. I'm just saying, if that isn't the goal is to move people to a place where they see the scripture in such a way that they see it as God reveals himself. This is the point of the Bible. It's not for me to get on my soapbox. It's for me to take the sacred trust of God of how God chose to reveal himself, and to share that with my kids in such a way that they grow in their affections for Christ, that they don't just grow in the knowledge of God, but they grow in their affections for God.
Yeah, to that point, Sam, it's pretty funny right now to watch the guys who are trying to pivot to page views or, the new kind of brag boards. Everybody's trying to find that. And the guys who are the healthiest aren't, because what's the imperative in the Great Commission? It's to make disciples.
Absolutely.
And so just to connect the dots there, we started a new sermon series this past Sunday on the Sermon on the Mount. And so I pre-recorded the sermon outside of our building. We've been streaming most of them from inside the building, but I did it outside because I wanted to make the point. In the video, I said, see this building behind me? Everything that Jesus tells us we need to do in the Sermon on the Mount, who we are as his disciples, is not dependent on a building, our programs, our activities. And when we are that, we're salt light. And the church is going to grow and lives are going to be changed as we're transformed from the inside out. So I think you guys are on point, in that area to say that in a healthy way, hopefully this is going to move the church away from some of what we would traditionally call the brag board numbers and more towards, authentic discipleship.
Yes. No. And I tell our youth guys all the time, it's faithfulness trumps famous any day.
Good.
Faithfulness trumps famous any day. And that is our goal, is not to be known by other people. It's to be known by God. That's what Galatians says, is as we're known by God. There's nothing greater than that.
This is good stuff. I'm going to tweet out immediately. I've always been saying, hey, discipleship's not an event. It's a way of life. Same points you guys are making, but I'm about to tweet what Sam just said and give credit. You are a pastor who preaches, not a preacher who pastors. That was really good. Dr. Ross, here's my question for you, sir. As we're coming out of this, how would you suggest that parents should be talking with their kids? What kind of conversation should those parents be having with their teenagers and or their children in their homes? What conversations are important right now?
Are you asking specifically about the crisis that we're in, or are you thinking big picture?
I'm thinking big picture teachable moments here, as we come out of this. What open-ended, where do you think this should go?
Okay. Little bit and then big bit.
Okay.
I think little bit, parents definitely need to talk with kids about what's going on in their lives, about the fears they might have, about their anxiety about the future. If we thought millennials were nervous about the future of the economy and their ability to make a living, just multiply that by about 100. Yeah. We have given away billions and billions of dollars that we don't have. We have just given away monopoly. I'm all for what we've done with money, but we have saddled this teenage generation with an unimaginably difficult future. And some of them are smart enough to figure that out. So I think parents have conversations about that. They talk about next fall. That is little bit. It's important. All I'm saying by little bit is I don't think that is the overarching issue, because what really makes you okay with the current situation and really what makes you okay with the future is I am here on this planet to join Jesus in bringing his kingdom on earth. And that really is the big deal that's going on with me. I'm down here on purpose. I'm down here with a mission. And what I do every morning is I jump out of bed and notice there's a king in my bedroom on a big white horse, and he's saying, get up, sleepyhead, let's go change the world. And I go figure out how to join him in doing what he does. So many youth speakers and so many youth leaders, it's just 90%. Jesus loves you. He wants to make all of your boo-boos better. And that there is truth to that. He is a wonderful shepherd, but he also wants to lift kids up to go do great things. And I'm not talking about goofiness. I'm not talking about religiosity that is superficial. I'm talking about mom and dad letting their kids know you've got a grand future because of the one that you follow. And he is adequate to take you on adventures that you can't even imagine. So you don't do that ignoring the personal issues. You definitely work through those. You talk through those. Lots of warmth in the middle of that. But I think parents are going to miss a bet if they don't get their kids' chins up. You got to get eyes up on Jesus and get the kids excited about next fall, whatever next fall looks like. It's a Jesus fall. So let's just go figure out how to get better prepared to do whatever he's inviting us to do to change the world.
Yeah, so good.
Sam, let me follow what Dr. Ross has just said there and apply this in your role here, family minister. How will teenagers and children, that next gen, areas, how will they remember this season of their life? I know I'm asking you to kind of predict or be a futurist here, but what do you think they'll remember it? And then if you can kind of follow that with how can we, ministry leaders, the church, parents, whomever, how can we help them remember this as a God moment, as a good memory within the greater picture of Christ?
Wow. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one thing that that'll shape that is how we respond. One of the things I tell parents whenever I do baby dedications is we talk about what the gospel requires of us in how we live our lives and what kind of demands it makes on us in order to how we live. And one of those is to suffer publicly. And part of the reason why that's so important, I think, for parents is I think kids, oftentimes we love our kids so much, we try to shield them from everything. And in doing that, what we do is we give them a picture of the world, like Dr. Ross is saying, that isn't real. It's not real, that there is real pain, there is real sorrow, there is real suffering, but there is also real hope. There's also real redemption. There's also real forgiveness. And one of the things I think that's so powerful for parents, right, is for kids to see the things that cause you pain, because it reveals to them what the thing that you actually love. Like what do I put my hope and trust in? When that's shaken, I have pain in my life, right? And what it shows to the kids when you're honest with them and reflect with them, it shows them that these things are important to my dad and to my mom. And the second part of that is where you run when pain comes into your life shows your kids who your Lord and Savior is. Do you run to Christ? Do you run to sports? Do you run to shopping? What do you run to take the pain away from your life that has been caused by the shaking? And so I think in this situation, how we handle ourselves as parents, how we handle the pain that we feel and the difficulty that we're facing will largely shape how kids respond. And one of the things that we've done, like in our kids ministry and youth ministry, is we've addressed the issue a little bit, but most of the time, mostly we don't. We leave that to the parents because we think they can do that better. What we're saying in this situation as pastors and leaders of kids is we're saying our job is to relentlessly talk about the hope and the joy and the peace and the grace and the goodness and the justice and the holiness of God, so that they have a picture of who God is. That they don't just see him as a buddy; they see him as a holy, righteous, good, loving, just, merciful God that is good. And that does good for them in a way that they might not understand in the moment, but looking back over time, they'll look back and they realize that greatest pain I experienced was actually mercy. It was mercy. It felt like pain in the moment, but it was mercy in the end.
Outstanding. I've learned as a leader, the more I know, the less I know. The bigger the crisis, the less we know all the answers. And I'm most scared when I'm around people who have all the answers right now. So Jay, this question's for you first, but then it's going to be the last question for all of us on this one. Pastors, we've never faced this season before. What advice do you have for pastors who are feeling their way along in this season? And I think if we're honest, we're all feeling our way along to a degree, trying to figure out is the right thing to do in ministry right now. What advice do you have for those pastors, Jay, and then Dr. Ross, and then Sam?
Yeah. Well, I think, Ron, you mentioned it. The first thing is just to acknowledge it. We feel off balance. By the very nature of what a shepherd does is you need to be with your flock. It's hard to be a good shepherd from a distance, and social media and, text messages and, those things, likes or whatever on your sermon, it just doesn't recreate what happens when you're in the room. I mean, as Sam's mentioned this already, but, God didn't send us a YouTube message with the gospel, right? He sent us himself, Jesus Christ in the flesh. Because incarnational ministry is important. So I think it's important. One word I think our generation is recovering a little bit is lament. That lament is taking, that pain to God. It's crying out to Him when you're exhausted and tired. I read a BBC article just yesterday about how there's cognitive dissonance that comes from even what we're doing right now, trying to meet online. Because it wears you out in a different kind of way, because your brain's fooled into thinking you're together, but your body knows you're really not, because we're holistic creatures. So I think we need to acknowledge just it's a difficult season. We need to own that. And yet, as we were talking about a moment ago, we need to take that to God. I think the other thing that we can do during this season, is to be hopeful, is to look at the God stories, document those, capture those. We've talked about that already, but pastors need to do that as well. I've continued to share just one simple story. There's a young lady who grew up in our church. She was in culinary school in New York City, met a boy. They started dating. When they left New York, when they were, when this thing was breaking out, he didn't have anywhere to go because he had a dysfunctional family system. So he ends up with her family here in Middle Tennessee. He starts asking questions by seeing the way their family does devotions and lives together. He says, "Can I talk to a pastor?" So I had the opportunity to, over FaceTime, lead this young man to the Lord, and that's just something that doesn't happen outside of this situation. That's a story that brings me hope. It brings me back to why I do what I do. And so pastors need to remember that, to see how God is at work in the middle of the difficulty right now. And then I think they need to ask the Kairos and Chronos question. So often pastors are on the treadmill. The two New Testament words for time are chronos, time of, where we get chronology, and chronicle, time of the clock. And we're always on the time of the clock so urgently. Well, now the other New Testament word is kairos. And that's what Paul uses, for instance, in Ephesians chapter 5, when he says, redeem or make the most of the time. So instead of saying, what time is it? This gives us some time and space to say, what is this time for? In our lives and in our ministries. And I think when you can begin to recalibrate your life in those terms, in biblical terms, what's this time for? Well, I can even rest a little bit, right? Because Jesus said on the cross, it's finished. So everything that really needs done is done. And I just have to point to that, just some of those restoring and recovering some of those healthy rhythms and those things that we know, but we get on the treadmill of the urgent, just like everybody else. I think that's one of the ways that we can navigate these times.
Dr. Ross, what advice do you have for pastors who are feeling their way along?
Well, we have spoken about pastors as shepherds, primarily thinking about their pastoral care. I want to just speak to another element of shepherding, a little bit different from that. One thing pastors have experienced with their flock, of course, during this season is they're out there. They're out there in the community, out there in their homes. I just wonder if that could help pastors see the potential of a new part of their ministry where they really do begin to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. And rather than this feverish, oh my gosh, if we stop for 1 minute, we're not going to keep this big program thing here going. Instead of, I'm trying to maintain this big thing that we have built, maybe the focus could shift more toward, I want my people to prosper. I want my people to make a difference for Jesus. I want their homes to be spiritually alive. I want them to be in the marketplace having gospel conversations that lift eyes to Jesus. It just seems in a way that could be a little bit more relaxed to say that I'm not building this thing in here that I've got to maintain as much as I'm sending out people that could smell like Jesus and make a difference wherever they go. This might be an opportunity to think brand new thoughts, about an equipping ministry and letting that saturate first all the pastors in a church and then the volunteers, where that just kind of becomes how we do church.
Mm-hmm.
Good insights from both of you. Sam, same question as we wrap up. What advice do you have for pastors who are feeling their way along in this season?
Well, I'd say welcome, because we all are. I'd say that first of all, but I think it's also like, just to reiterate what my brothers have been saying. It really comes down to this understanding that Jesus builds the church at the end of the day. Yeah. And I think what we have to remember is that we are like individualistic, we're hard workers, we're all those things. Those are all good qualities, but at the end of the day, it is not on me. I'm responsible, but it's God's work. And for that, what that does is that creates in me an innate humility, because I can't take credit for it, but it also creates a confidence because I can't take the blame for it. And what my job, again, is to be faithful. And that's what I would just say to pastors out there. Just continue to be faithful. Remember that Jesus builds a church. Work as hard as you possibly can, but trust as much as you possibly can. And God, this isn't a surprise to him. He didn't wake up one day and say, wow, I got to read up on this COVID. He is moving his church towards to an end that we don't know, but we trust because he's good. He's good. And I love in the Chronicles of Narnia, I think this is so comforting for me all the time. I think about it, is that when the kids come and they ask the beaver, that they find out about who Aslan is, they don't know who he is. And they said, he says he's a lion, and they're scared because they know lions are vicious, and they say, but is he a tame lion? And they're like, no, he's not tame, but he's good. And I think understanding that God is not tame, but he's good, and that he's building the church gives us confidence in uncertainty.
Without a doubt, this is why I invited every one of you in there. And if everybody's listening, you understand why these thought leaders came together to kind of give you a different perspective. And so I want to thank each of you, Dr. Ross, Jay, Sam, for being here. I want to thank all the people who are listening. My challenge to you is to be the church. We need to reopen the building, and we need to gather well. And let's steward this very, very carefully so that when we come back together, it is truly a celebration and an equipping time. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.